Hi everyone, and welcome to our Genetec Tech Talk webinar on putting the security in Security Center. My name is Derek. I'm a technical training and e-content specialist with Genetec, and I'm going to be your host for the webinar today. Today we also have Martina with us. She's going to be handling any questions and answers you have during the webinar. If you do have any questions, you can go ahead and ask them in the GoToWebinar console. Just type in a question and one of us will get back to you with an answer as soon as we can. Now if there's any questions that we need to look up any information for, or if we have too many questions for the time that we have today, we'll be sure to get back to you with an email with an answer for your question. All the common questions and answers that we get from the webinar today will be posted in the Genetec Portal Technical Assistance Forum. And we'll also put the links to the videos that we record. So we've recorded all the webinars up till now. We're recording this one today, so we're going to have that in the forum as well for the webinar today. So you can go ahead and check that out. And we're also going to have a link to the slide deck that we're using today in PDF format for your reference. Now we usually try to get that up in about a day, so Friday afternoon we should have that up there for you. In case there's anything you need to go back and watch, or if you have a coworker who needs to see this as well and couldn't be here for the webinar today, then that'll be there. And we also have the videos in the training video section of the Technical Assistance portal on our website. So basically just go under GTAC Tech Talk, and you can either download a zipped Windows Media version like this one right here, or you can click on the streaming version right here, which is going to bring you to a link to our YouTube channel. So if you want to see more of the videos, you can just go to our YouTube channel. It's Genetec Training. Just search for that in your YouTube search bar, and that'll bring you to our portal here. Of course, you can view this either through your web browser, or you can do it through a mobile device. So if you're on site and you need to look something up, you can just go ahead and pull up the Genetec Training channel on YouTube right there. Okay, so we've got a lot of information to go through today, so we're going to jump right into it. I want to take just a minute to go over the agenda, what we're going to talk about today. So first we're going to cover some general information. So we're going to talk about the encryption keys first of all, and just give you a little background on that. Then we're going to go on to talk about certificates, what those are, how they're used, and how you can configure and manage those on your system as well. After that, we're going to start getting into the new security features we have, starting with the directory features, starting with the TLS protocol. So we're going to go over the theory of that, and then we're going to take a look at how we can set up the certificate that we're using for TLS, take a look at any backwards compatibility and limitations regarding this particular feature. And then we're going to talk about claims-based authentication and using an STS, which is another new feature that we've added. And then the last subject we're going to cover today is concerning the archiver, the new archiver stream encryption. So first we're going to talk about the theory of it, what it's actually doing. Then we're going to go into how to configure that on the system. And that's a lot of information to handle, so then we're going to take a look at some particular stream encryption scenarios. So things will get a lot clearer once you actually see the scenarios and see what the streams are doing in there with the archiver stream encryption. That's also known as fusion stream encryption. You might hear that term thrown around too. And of course in the end we're going to take a look at the impact on the system of using this new feature and any restrictions and limitations that we have as well. So moving on to our first topic, we're going to take a look at encryption keys. So this is one of the basic components that we need in the system to be able to increase the security of how the communication happens within your actual security center system. So the security center system is there to protect your assets, your sites, your people, and what these features are here for are basically to protect your security center system and keep that information that's traveling safer for the data purposes, basically. So looking at encryption keys, the first thing that we need to look at is what it's actually doing. So on the system we have our original data, that goes through an encryption key, and that gets turned into scrambled data, or cipher data as it's sometimes called. That gets transferred over the system, and then when it gets to its destination, we use a decryption key, and that changes it back into our original data. Now what this is used for is basically, it means that only authorized users can view this original data. So if anybody takes a look at it while it's in transit, or while it's scrambled and stored on a device, they won't be able to directly see it unless they actually have this decryption key. Now there's two types of encryption that we can do. The first one is called symmetric, and this is where the encryption key is exactly the same as the decryption key. So this is where we use private keys for both. It's the same key for both of them. And the other method is asymmetric encryption. So in asymmetric, the encryption key and the decryption key are different, but they're mathematically linked. So the decryption key still knows how to decipher the information it gets that was created from the encryption key, but it is different. So what happens with asymmetric communication is usually one of the keys is distributed publicly. That's the public key. And that you can give to basically anybody, and then you keep another one secure, and that's called the private key. So the private key you want to keep very safe, and that's usually your decryption key, but you can actually do it the other way around, so we'll see how that's used a little bit later on. So a few pros and cons for both. Symmetric, or also known as private key encryption. Pros for that, it's very fast to do. So it's fast to actually do the encryption. It's easily implemented by the hardware, which means that it doesn't take a lot of resources to do. And this is commonly used for bulk data encryption. So if you have a lot of information that's going back and forth, you don't want to slow this down so much. So basically, you're going to use your symmetric encryption for that. A couple of cons, there's problems with distribution and the control of the private keys. So as we saw, both the keys are exactly the same, which means it's easier for somebody to get their hands on that key and be able to decrypt any of the information that they receive. We'll see how that may happen in our next section. A couple of examples, AES, RC4, and DES. So if you hear of those protocols, you know those are symmetric encryption protocols. Pros and cons for asymmetric, which is also known as public key encryption. Pros, of course, there's less risk because the private keys, we're keeping them more secure. Only the destinations should have the private keys. The public keys are shared with whoever, but if somebody gets their hands on the public key, they can't decrypt that information. That's fine. As well, we're going to take a look at certificates later, and the asymmetric encryption provides that underlying architecture to be able to use certificates and digital signatures and things of that sort. Cons, of course, it's slower than private key encryption, and it does require more resources in terms of hardware as well. So we'll see where that's an impact, and we'll see how we can balance between the two. We're going to take a look at that a little bit later. A few examples is RSA, DSS, and DSA. Now just to cover a little terminology here, when we talk about encryption strength, we're actually talking about the number of bits in the key. So if you hear somebody say something like AES 256, you know AES is the encryption algorithm, and 256 is the key strength, so that's a 256-bit encryption key that they're using. Alright, so that's the first building block that we need to look at. The second one is about certificates. So let's take a look at certificate usage and configuration and management. I'm going to start off with an example of why we would want to use certificates. So a very common attack is called a man-in-the-middle attack. So what happens in that situation? We have our original connection here. We have our two endpoints who are happily communicating with each other. And then what happens in this case is somebody comes along and they intercept the data, make it go through themselves, take a look at it, and then they can actually forward that so it keeps going, and we have a new connection here. So basically what happens is the two endpoints may not actually even realize that there's been a breach and that there's somebody else listening in on the line, this man in the middle here. So basically, what can happen here is if we don't have the data encrypted, then it's even easier for the man in the middle to see the data. There's no decryption, there's no keys required, so that makes it even more insecure. So encryption is good from that perspective, unless he has actually gotten his hands on one of the decryption keys. But it's also, encryption isn't enough. We're going to see that basically just because he can't see the data doesn't mean that he can't stop it or can't modify it or do anything like that. And the endpoints won't even know that it's not coming from a valid source at that point too. So this is where we bring certificates in. Because what happens with a certificate, it's a secure document that is attached to the data, and basically it allows you to confirm the identity of the sender. So in our man in the middle example, basically the man in the middle would intercept the data, but then on the end, the person who is receiving it would take a look at the certificate and say, wait a minute, that's not who I was expecting that from, so I'm not going to trust this information. They're digitally signed, so that prevents tampering while the data is in transit, so it's going over the network, or at rest, which means you can have certificates on data that are actually stored on storage locations. They contain a subject, and that usually, or that uniquely identifies the person who sent them. The subject is usually the FQDN, which is the fully qualified domain name. That's usually the host name and the domain name put together. So that way you can tell exactly that the sender is who they say they are, and it also contains the entity's public key as well. We have two types. We can have untrusted or trusted certificates. Self-signed certificates are usually untrusted. We're going to see how that can be changed in a bit. And also, if we have a trusted certificate, that can be verified either locally or online using a certificate authority, which you're going to see abbreviated as CA quite a bit in this presentation. So if you have a fully encrypted communication conversation going on between two endpoints, everyone has a certificate, both the clients and the servers. So that's what keeps everything secure there. The two reasons why we would want to use certificates. One is that we saw in the man-in-the-middle attack, we want to confirm the identity of the sender. So that way we can tell if there's been any interception or anything like that going on. And as well, we want to provide the recipient with the encryption key so that it can reply securely back to the sender. So that's really what gets that secure communication going on between the two of them. So I want to take a quick look. This is a diagram we pulled from Wikipedia on what the steps that it goes through when you're actually applying a certificate to data. So first we're going to go through the signing steps, and this is what happens at the source. So we have our original data right here, and then we apply a hash function, as we call it here, a cryptographic hashing algorithm. So basically that's a mathematical function that we apply to the data, and then we get a hash value from that. So then what we do with the hash file is we take that and we apply the private key of the entity signing the data, and we create this digital signature with it. The signature is attached with the certificate, and then we attach that to the data, and that gets sent on to our destination. On the destination side, it has to go through verification steps now. So it takes that digitally signed data, it splits it off into the data and the digital signature, and then the first thing it does is it applies that exact same hash function, that same algorithm to the data, and then it gets a new hash value. We call that the current hash value because it is relative to the current data that it's holding. Then as well, it takes that signature that it received and it decrypts it using the public key that it received, and then we get the original hash value. So this is the value that was created over here using the private key. So then what we can do is we can compare the current value from the data that it received with the original one that was sent along with it in the digital signature. And if those are equal, then we know the signature is valid, nothing happened along the way, and we're all good to go. So what can happen that would make this not equal? So what we might see first is if the digital signature was modified. So that means that when we use the public key, this original hash value would not be the same because it would not get the same information from the signature. The second thing that could happen is if the data that was received was altered. So then when we apply this hash function, that algorithm again, we're not going to get the same value as we did originally when we signed the data. Since the data is not the same, we're not going to get the same hash value here. So the signature would be the same, but this one would not, so they wouldn't be equal here. And then of course the last scenario is if the public key that was received doesn't correspond to the private key that was used. So maybe during the man-in-the-middle attack, it replaced the key in the signature or in the certificate with a different public key. So what would happen then is we wouldn't get the same value for the original hash value, and of course they wouldn't be the same, and we would know this is invalid information. So that's a quick overview of what happens when we're using certificates on the system. Okay, I mentioned there's two types of certificates. There's the signed certificate and the self-signed certificate. So just to give you a couple examples of here, what they look like, you'll see for a signed certificate, this is from Genetec. That was actually VeriSign. VeriSign was acquired by Genetec. So now if you see VeriSign anywhere, it'll probably redirect you to Genetec. It's the same thing basically now. So you'll see who it was issued by. You can see it's a valid certificate here. And in the self-signed certificate, you can see that it's giving you this warning here, and it's telling you that the certificate is not trusted. We're going to see how we can change that in a little bit. But you can see obviously this is not the same thing, and you get a lot more information in the signed certificate. Now, certificates are managed within the certificate store on your operating system. For Windows, you can access that through mmc.exe. And then the first time you go in, if you haven't used it before, you're just going to have your console root there. So you may need to add the certificate snap-in for that. So you just do File, Add Remove Snap-in, choose Certificates, and click on the Add button here, and then it's going to ask you which one you want to use. So usually we'll use the local computer for that. So once you do have that information, then you can see which certificates are on the system. If your organization has an Active Directory system set up, that may already be managing the certificates on the domain. So that means it would be sent out to the clients and things like that, and those would contain the appropriate encryption keys as well. So signed certificates, you can also get those from a third-party certificate authority or CA. So various ones that we have are like DigiCert, Entrust, GoDaddy, Thought, and I mentioned Genetec before. Now your self-signed certificates, those can actually be created within your local operating system too. So just to give you an example, from within Windows 8.1, you just need to go into your control panel, go into your user accounts, and then you click on your Manage Your File Encryption Certificates link right here, and it'll open up a wizard and it's going to step you through everything you need to know to create a self-signed certificate for you. Now any certificate that's issued by a trusted root authority will be trusted by the local operating system. So those third-party certificate authorities, those would be trusted. If you're setting this up on a Windows server, it contains a certificate authority as part of the certificate services, and that can be used for the creation of digital certificates and manage them within for the users and computers that are on that system. And any domain members on that same system as the server will automatically trust these certificates. So that's a very easy way to set that up. And I mentioned this self-signed certificates are usually untrusted. Well, there's a way that we can actually make them trusted. So this is the MMC console I was talking about here. And from within our local computer, we have one that's called Trusted Root Certification Authorities here. So within the certificates here, anything in here will be considered trusted. So you can actually move your self-signed certificate, like we did in this example, into this certificate folder, and then it'll be considered a trusted certificate. Now a bit more information where we can get where the private key comes from. Where do we get that from? So basically on your system, the key pair can be generated locally on the client workstation. So if you have the certificate installed, you can get the private key from that. You can also distribute a key pair file, which is a .pfx file. If you're using a file like that, you need to be very careful what happens to the file after you're finished with it. So just bear in mind that this private key is something that really needs to be kept secure, otherwise it really opens up the system. So that file needs to be managed very well. And also the key can be pushed to one or more users via the Active Directory as well. Now, within Security Center, we're choosing which certificate to use in several cases. We're going to see that in a little bit. But the actual keys and the certificate management is all done within the operating system. So that's done within Windows, within the certificate store. So within Security Center, we're basically just choosing which one to use. If you have a client that's interested in using this feature, or if you're interested in using this feature, typically an IT department that's used to dealing with certificates will have an opinion or a procedure on the best way to distribute the keys within their organization. So that's a matter of internal security as well. And as I mentioned, a weak or insecure key distribution system, it really defeats the purpose of encrypting the data. So if everybody has this private key, then your information isn't really secured at all, because anybody can decrypt it at that point. Okay, so let's move on to one of the new Security Center features in 5.4, and that's the use of the TLS protocol. The previous versions of Security Center, they were all using the SSL, or Secure Sockets Layer protocol, to encrypt any communication between components on the system. And SSL was getting a little long in the tooth, as they say. There were a few holes in it, so the next gen version of that is basically TLS. That stands for Transport Layer Security, and what we'll see from TLS is it is a lot safer for those man-in-the-middle attacks that we were talking about. We use encryption first of all on TLS, and that's used to hide the data, so that means we have greater privacy. And we also use certificates with TLS, and that's to authenticate the entities. So this is for better data integrity. So basically that we know who the information is coming from. It's using both. We mentioned before when we were looking at encryption, we have asymmetric and symmetric. TLS is using both. So originally it's going to use asymmetric encryption, and that's to establish a connection because that's more secure, but we remember it's heavier too. So once it's got that secure connection going on, it's going to switch over and use symmetric encryption at that point. And that's basically to continue the conversation. As we mentioned, it's better for bulk data moving, and it's faster for that too. So we're going to take a look at that in just a second, give you a couple examples of what TLS is actually doing. Now the type of information that's protected on Security Center when we're using TLS, the information from the client workstation to the directory server, that's protected, and also from expansion servers to the directory server is protected using TLS as well. Okay, so let's step through a quick example of what happens between a client and a directory when we're establishing this TLS connection. So the first thing that happens here is the client establishes a TCP connection with the server, and that's using a standard three-way TCP connection using synchronize and acknowledge. So the client sends the synchronize, the directory acknowledges that, and sends an acknowledgement back, which the client receives. And then the client will send a TLS hello message to the server, And this includes the version of the TLS protocol it's running and basically a list of supported cipher suites that it's capable of using. So it sends that over to the server. And then the server goes through and picks the TLS protocol version that it wants to use for further communication, and it decides on which one of the cipher suites to use from the list that was provided by the client. And then it also attaches its certificate containing its public key and sends that back to the client. From the client perspective, it then establishes a symmetric session key, which is encrypted with the server's public key that it had just sent, and that sends that back to the server here. And then from that point on, since they know how to communicate in a symmetric fashion, everything else keeps going using symmetric encryption at that point. Now, we mentioned the different stages where we have no encryption whatsoever, which is just clear data. Then we have the asymmetric encryption that we mentioned and the symmetric encryption. And those are the different stages right there when it's going through that. So of course in the beginning, they're just starting to talk to each other, so they can't encrypt anything because they don't know how to talk to each other, which encryption method to use. And then once they set that up using asymmetric encryption, which is more secure, then once they get a good valid communication going between the two of them, they can switch over to symmetric and really get the data flowing at that point. Taking a look at this a little more graphically in terms of the information being sent. So this is our TCP three-way handshake going on here, and we've established the TCP connection. And then we have the client sending over the TLS versions and its cipher suites, basically the hello that it's sending. The directory is responding saying, okay, we want to use TLS version this, we want to use this cipher suite, and here's the certificate with my public key. And at this point, the client says, okay, well, here's the symmetric session key you want to use, and I'll encrypt it with your public key, which that gets sent over and it's secure back to the directory. And then at this point, we have the secure communication with both of them using the same symmetric encryption key on both sides of the conversation. So hopefully that makes that pretty clear in terms of TLS and what's going on the system. So how do we actually use this on the directory? So we can actually choose which certificate to use for TLS on the directory. There's a new step when we're installing the software. This is on 5.4 GA. So you're going to see that there's a new checkbox called Allow Only Trusted Connections. Now when that comes up, if that's unchecked, basically the TLS is still being used, but it's transparent. You're not having any control over that. So when the directory is installed, we include a self-signed certificate. We're going to take a look at that in a second. But basically it's going to use that and send that out to the clients and send that out to the expansion servers. And if we don't have that checked, there's no verification on the other end that this is actually the valid certificate. So that means it is still slightly open to man-in-the-middle attacks if somebody can intercept that certificate on the way to the client or to the servers. Now, if we do have this checked, what happens when the clients connect is they must actually choose to allow the connection to trust this connection with the directory server. So they're going to get this pop-up window the very first time they log in, and it's going to say we've received the certificate from the directory. Here's the details if you want to take a look at them, and if everything looks okay, they can click on the I confirm that I trust this server and then continue login. At that point, it's going to accept the certificate, it's going to keep it in a cache locally, and then at that point it's going to it's never going to have to ask for this again. So it's going to consider the directory trusted as long as the certificate doesn't change or the software isn't reinstalled or something like that. So this only happens once, and this is on a per machine basis, so every client is going to have to go through this if they don't actually have that valid certificate. Similar thing happens on the expansion servers. So from the server admin, when you're actually making that connection to the directory server from the expansion, it's going to send the certificate over from the directory to the expansion server, and it's going to tell you that, oh, I can't verify the identity of this directory, can you help me out here? And at this point we can view the certificate details, see if it's what we're expecting, and then we can accept the certificate. And once again, this is a one-shot deal, so as long as nothing changes on the system, you accept it on the expansion server and it's going to be able to communicate securely at that point on. Now of course this is something that happens, that allow only trusted connections button, during installation. So what happens later on? If you do need to change this, you can actually go into the general settings.gconfig file, and the parameter to change is TLS channel policy. So we can change that to trusted only, which means it's going to prompt for the information for the clients and the expansion servers, or we can set it to allow all, which is the one where it just sends the certificate over and it's trusted by default. So looking at how this is actually set up on the directory itself, we have the secure communication section in the server admin, and this is going to tell you the current certificate. This is an example of our self-signed certificate that's created by default. So it's Genetec server dash and then your machine name. So that's the name of the machine that I had this installed on. But as well, if you've purchased a third-party trusted certificate from a certificate authority like Genetec, you can load that into your certificate store, and if you click on select, you can actually choose it from the list here as well. So you can see by default there's our self-signed one that was created. Now let's talk about backwards compatibility and limitations. From that same section we were just looking at, we have a button here that says allow connection of previous versions. So if you want to be super secure and you don't want anybody to connect unless they're all on 5.4, you can actually check that box, and it's going to block the, or uncheck the box, sorry, and it will block the connection from, let's say, a 5.3 or below machine. This, to use the backwards compatibility, the server has to be on 5.4, and as well, what's going to happen if we are connecting from a previous version server or client, is it is going to use SSL. The previous ones don't know how to use TLS, so the SSL protocol is still in place that can still be used to communicate with previous versions. Another limitation here, the RTSP communication is not covered by TLS, and this is a little nope, did I just lose my screen? Nope, okay. So this the third line, certificates for client application authentication are not supported. So what that means is basically on the client side, we're asking the directory to prove who they are, but the clients do not have to prove who they are to the directory. So it's basically one way in that regard. So that's what that means right there. And as well, certificates may expire after a specific amount of time. So the self-signed certificate is given an expiration date of 100 years. So that's fine, but the ones you purchase online from certificate authorities, those may expire. So there may be some extra steps that you have to take for certificate management, and make sure you select the new valid certificate from within the directory as well. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about, we're just going to do a general overview of this. It could possibly be a very large subject if we go into it in complete detail, but I want to give you at least an overview and understand what the new STS feature is in Security Center 5.4, and that's basically claims-based authorization, or authentication, excuse me. So STS is an STS is a secure token service, and what that is used for is to verify claims made by users and issue tokens. So this is a method that we can use to replace traditional authentication. So instead of putting a username and password in and directly into the system, we use security tokens to verify who a person is instead. The tokens contain claims about the user, so basically facts or information about them so that we can verify that they are who they say they are. And they're not only used for greater security, but they're used for greater authentication flexibility as well. So basically what you see is that users from more than one domain can access a system without exposing the entire security structure of the remote system. So if you have a user who is in an Active Directory system on a particular client, you can have them access the Security Center system, but you don't have to open up that whole Active Directory system on the other on the external system to Security Center. So it really is a nice bridge between the two, and of course you can have multiple claims going to an STS as well. So that means that people from different domains can all use the same STS to access your system and things like that. And what that's really aiming for and heading towards is a single sign-on environment for a user. Right now, the one that we have implemented is the Microsoft Active Directory Federation Services, which is a mouthful, so we just call it ADFS from now on. Now, why is this useful? Why would we want to use an STS? So basically, as I mentioned, there's no need to set up those multiple Active Directory domains for your users, for multiple organizations, or add a whole bunch of users from external systems to your Security Center system. So I mentioned the single sign-on approach. You're probably already familiar with this for something like your Google account, for example. So your Google account can be used to access YouTube. You can get into Gmail from there. You can get into Stratocast from there. So this is really what we're moving towards with that, is that people don't have to have a whole bunch of usernames and passwords for different systems. As well, that's the next point right here, is we're not storing a whole bunch of those user credentials on the local system. So we don't have this database full of usernames and passwords. That's all handled by the STS, so that means it's more secure. Somebody can't get into your system and pull that whole list and see all the usernames and passwords because they're not being stored there. When the user tries to log in, it's the STS that's going to be handling their authentication. And as well, those authenticators, a lot of cases, that's all they do. That's their bread and butter. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel here. We're basically using the power that they have for authentication and to keep things more secure. And as well, it's simpler for us too, because the STS can communicate with other providers on other domains, but all that management is being handled from the STS itself. So in the case of ADFS, it's looking at the other Active Directories. And from Security Center, we're just looking at the ADFS for our tokens, and we don't have to worry about all the other things that are attached to it pretty much. Really a single point of contact there. And one last thing I want to point out is basically this is separating the authentication from the authorization. So the authentication is done by, for example, the employer of the user who is on the Active Directory system, but the authorization is done by the Security Center administrator. So the AD can say, yes, that person is who they say they are, they can log into your system, and from the Security Center side, we're saying what they can actually do. One really important thing here is that if we had that user on an Active Directory system and we also had independent credentials for them on the Security Center system, if they happen to be let go, then they would get removed from that Active Directory system immediately. So that's something that the user's organization would do right away, but it might take some time for that information to trickle down to the Security Center administrator. Using an STS, if they're gone from the AD, right away they're going to be denied access to the Security Center system as well. So that's something else that's very powerful that can be done with an STS. So just to give you a quick example, we have our directory here, we have our new ADFS role that we've got set up. The ADFS role is talking to our STS, which is our ADFS server here, and there's our user trying to log in. Now just in this example and overall, If we're doing any internal communication, we're using port 5500. If we're talking externally to the STS, that's going to be using port 443. So the first thing that happens is the client connects to the directory and says, hello, I'd like to sign in. I have this valid authentication that I'd like to use. And the directory basically says, well, hold on a second, I don't need that. I want you to connect to STS, and I want you to get a token for me. The user reaches out to the STS using, in this case, our corporate credentials, so their AD credentials, and requests an identity token. The STS is going to take a look on their Active Directory domains and see whether this person is allowed. If it's verified and they're good to go, it will supply the client with a valid token. The user then supplies this token to the directory, and the directory just basically verifies that the token has been authorized and allows the user into the system. So it's really that simple. It's not a lot of extra steps here, and it's basically transparent to the user once you have that set up, and it's a lot more secure in the end. The actual configuration, I could talk for an hour about this alone, so I'm just going to put the basic steps here. If this is something you need to get set up, you're going to have help with the ADFS part, first of all, and we have various configuration guides that are available as well to help with the actual ADFS setup on the Security Center system. But what you'd basically do is you go into your add an entity to your system task, and you'd add an Active Directory Federation Service role. So once that role is created, we just need to set up the ADFS itself needs to be set up on a server. That's external. That's something that would have to be taken care of using the Windows Server Manager. And within ADFS, you need to configure the claims and trusts with the providers. The providers are basically like your Active Directory domains and things like that. And so the ADFS has the capabilities to be able to get all the information it needs. Then once we have the role created, we just need to configure the role in the system task. So basically configuring where we're reaching out to for the ADFS server. And then the last thing we need to do is actually set up our trusted groups in the user management. So this is basically saying if somebody's trying to log in, are they someone that should be reaching out and getting a token for us? So you can have a mixed system like that too. So that's something you can do. The steps aren't very much. It's just there's a few details in there that you need to know and get that set up for you. Okay, so that's claim-based authentication. That's the last thing we're doing with the directory. Now we're going to move on to archive or stream encryption. We're going to talk about the theory and the configuration for it, and then we're going to take a look at some examples. This is also, you may hear fusion stream encryption refers to the same thing here. So let's take a quick look at what happens if we were using the archive or stream encryption on an actual system. We have our main server, we have our archiver server here with the redirector, of course, it's included with every archiver. We have our camera, and we have our client over here. Now the client is requesting a video stream from this camera. The video stream is encrypted, so the first thing that happens is the video is sent unencrypted from the video stream. As soon as it hits the server, the encryption is applied. It carries on to the archiver, and then that goes to the redirector, and what's sent to the client in the end is an encrypted video stream, and they also get an encrypted key stream. So basically the client needs both of those to be able to actually view the video from that camera. I just want to point out that this encryption is done before anything else happens. So as soon as the video hits the server, before it's recorded, before it's saved, before it's redirected, anything, it gets encrypted. So this makes things even more secure here. So just to give you an idea of what goes on in the system, we have our workstations here, and what's going on is we have a key pair for our encryption here, and that's given to the workstation or the group of workstations, and that's being done on the Windows system, so that's happening outside of Security Center. And in that key pair, we have both the private key that we're talking about and the public key for asymmetric encryption. The private key only goes to the workstations. So that I need to stress that. Basically, the servers don't have this private key. So the archiver, the expansion servers, everybody else in the system, the only ones who can decrypt video when you're using this method are the users themselves, the ones that we actually have set up that have the private keys. The public key, of course, we can give to anybody, so we're sending that out to the archiver. That gets installed on there, and once that's over there, that's being used to actually encode the video. And basically we can do that on a per camera or a per archiver basis, and we just need to make sure that whatever camera or whatever key the camera is using, the clients have the appropriate decryption private key. So taking a look at this in a little more detail, the first thing that happens when the video comes in, I'm saying video, but of course this is archiver stream encryption. So we can do video, we can do audio, we can do metadata. Any one of the streams that comes in, if we have this turned on, will get encrypted. So in our example, we're using a video stream, a single video stream. So it encrypts the video stream using AES 128 encryption, so it's 128-bit encryption, and it's doing that in using symmetric encryption. It's doing that using a symmetric key. Now this symmetric key is randomly generated, and that changes every 60 seconds. That's not stored at all, that's just being used by the archiver. And then of course the archiver needs the public key from the workstation, so it imports that. And then the key to decrypt the stream is itself encrypted with RSA 2048 asymmetric encryption. So basically we're using symmetric encryption on the video stream, and then we're encrypting that symmetric key using an asymmetric key to basically keep it doubly secure. So then the client gets sent over both the encrypted video stream, this is our symmetric encrypted stream, and the key stream, which is our asymmetric encrypted stream of those keys that it needs to use to decrypt it. Then, of course, once it's received on the client end, the client uses the private key that it has, the secure one that only the clients have, and it decrypts that key stream, and then uses that decrypted set of keys to decrypt the video stream that it has that's done in symmetric encryption. So I hope that's clear. There's a lot of steps there, but we're going to look at some examples, and that's going to clear things up hopefully for you. Now in terms of actually configuring this on the system, we're doing this through the recording tab of either the archiver, which will apply this to any cameras on the system, or you can do it on a per camera basis. And of course we can have multiple cameras using this, we can have multiple certificates being used. So the first thing we need to do is show the advanced settings. Then we need to go down here and turn on encryption. And then once we have that turned on, we can choose to add a certificate from here. So we can either choose one that's already been installed on the system, or we can browse to a certificate file, a .cer file. So that's something that could be self-signed or come from a certificate authority as well. So once we have that configured, let's take a look at a few encryption scenarios. So this is our basic stream encryption, where we're going to look at a single stream and we're using multiple certificates just to give you a clearer idea of what's actually happening on the system. And we'll see how that's relevant on the strain on the system too. So basically we have our video stream that's coming in, and on the archiver we have that symmetric key stream going. So that's the one that's changing every 60 seconds by default. It's not saved, it's just being used. And we're using that symmetric key stream to make our symmetric encrypted stream. So it's taking the video stream, using the symmetric key on it and creating this this stream. I mentioned in the example before we were using video, but we can use audio or metadata as well. And then what happens, this is our asymmetric encryption here, where the key stream that's being generated is having the public key of the certificate installed on the symmetric key stream. So in our example here, we have two certificates installed, one for a client or a group of clients, so certificate A, and we have their certificate B as well. So for each symmetric key stream that we're creating here, we're creating a new one for group A and a new one for group B. And we'll see how that's more relevant in the next one here. So this is our key stream, and that gets asymmetrically decrypted to give us the keys back on the client side that can be used to decrypt our symmetrically encrypted data stream, so video, audio, or metadata. If you take a look in the archiver.gconfig file, you can see that these values can be changed. So the frequency and the check for expired keys can be changed as well. So let's take a look at a second scenario, and that might be a little bit more, show you a little bit more detail on what's happening with those two certificates we have installed. So we have certificate A and certificate B. And in this example, we do have multiple streams coming in as well. So we've got a video stream and an audio stream coming in from the camera, and that's getting encrypted using both the A and B certificate. So let's say in the example, a client that has certificate B installed is requesting to watch video, just video, no audio from this camera. So from the camera, we're getting the live video and audio coming in. Again, this isn't encrypted yet, and that's going into the archiver, and as soon as it hits it, it gets encrypted, and then what gets redirected to the client workstation is first that symmetrically encrypted video stream, and it's also sending that asymmetrically encrypted key stream for certificate B. Now on the actual storage device on the archiver, we can see here that since we're getting both a video stream and an audio stream, we've got the encrypted video stream that's being kept, that's a symmetric one, symmetrically encrypted audio stream, and of course since we have two certificates, we have the certificate A video key stream and certificate B video key stream. And the same thing for the audio, so it's got a different stream for certificate A and certificate B. Now what happens when we're talking about auxiliary archiving? So the stream is coming in from the camera to the archiver, and as I mentioned multiple times, as soon as it hits that, boom, it gets encrypted. So what happens to the auxiliary archiver? Well, that actually gets the encrypted files. It stores the encrypted files itself. The private keys are only kept on the actual client workstations, not on the servers, so that means that the archiver can't see the video, the auxiliary archiver can't see the video. All they can do is take the encrypted files and actually store them on their storage device. So that keeps things very secure, so there's no point where it gets decrypted unless you actually have that private key. Alright, let's talk about exporting encrypted video. So the exported video is still encrypted, so if you want to export video, you still need that private key to view it. Post 5.4, this will be viewable using the new Genetec video player if the private key is installed on this workstation. And you can actually export and remove the encryption as well if you're exporting to an ASF file. But of course you don't want every client to just be able to do this, because that kind of defeats the purpose of actually having the encryption there. So there is a new privilege for that called remove encryption, and for a client to be able to do this, they need to have a connection to the directory so it can verify that they do have this remove encryption privilege enabled. Now, other things that it can do in terms of encryption, we can do the archiver, transfer, backup, and restore functions. Those work on encrypted files just like before. In case we have an archiver problem, we can still reindex the files. Just one thing, you got to make sure that the encryption file is backed up. So the private key that is on the workstations, make sure that's backed up somewhere and kept very secure, just in case. Especially if you have a single client that's using a particular certificate to access a camera, need to make sure that they have that somewhere in case that particular workstation goes down. And of course, this is supported through federation as well, and the client on the federated end must have the private key. So we just have a couple of things left. I want to talk about the impact on your system. I want to talk about any restrictions and limitations with the archiver encryption as well, stream encryption. So in terms of the impact on the system, as we were just talking about before, each certificate that's added to a camera or an archiver, it creates its own independent encrypted key stream, and it also creates the stream per certificate as well, the asymmetric key stream. So as we saw for the video stream, we had the video stream and we had certificate A and B, so we basically had 3 streams right there. So taking a look at the performance impact on the actual archiver, and the numbers that are generated here, bear in mind that this is for a certificate that's been applied to all cameras on the archiver. So immediately there's a 30% hit when you start using certificates, but it's not linear, so it does go down to 96 cameras. If you're using 20 certificates, we don't recommend going above that number of certificates per archiver. On the workstation itself, you may see the CPU usage go up between 15 and 40%, depending on the size of the image. Long story short, it's actually lighter on larger images, so that's something to bear in mind. And in terms of actually viewing the video, so you're dragging a camera into the tile and you're using the encryption to view that live footage, it just takes a fraction of a second longer, so it's 275 milliseconds extra, which is a quarter of a second and hardly noticeable, so there's not much of a hit from that standpoint. A few other quick restrictions and limitations. So as I mentioned, the weakest link there is the stream from the camera to the archiver. That's not encrypted using this method. That's not encrypted yet. That's something that's coming soon. And since the encryption is done as soon as it hits the archiver, we can't use the archiver stream encryption if we're using a multicast stream from a camera. So that means basically the stream is going directly from the camera to the client, and it's bypassing that whole encryption part right there. I also mentioned that the archiver needs to have the private key to actually decrypt the video, which we don't want it to have. It's only going to be on the workstations. So that means that we can't use this if we want to use thumbnails, if we want to use software motion detection, and if we want to use analog monitors, because all of these functions require access to the unencrypted video stream, which the archiver doesn't have. So that's something to bear in mind if you're looking at using this feature. A few things that are not encrypted: edge recording, unit trickling, and mobile streams are all not encrypted. And we were talking about certificates expiring before. And of course, if you have video that was decrypted and then that certificate expires, you don't want that to be a problem if you need to look up older video, because of course some states and countries require video to be held for quite a long time. So if you have an expired certificate, that can still be used for decryption. So your previously recorded video, if you have the certificate, you can still decrypt it and you can still see it. That won't be a problem. You just can't use it for encryption, so you would have to put a new certificate in place for that. As well, the encrypted video frames can't be used with the SDK. There's no functionality in there right now for the decryption of the video frames. So that's it for the restrictions and limitations. And that does it for the webinar today. So I'd like to thank you very much for coming. We're going to keep the session active for about another 10 minutes. So if you have any questions for myself or Martina, please go ahead and ask them. If you don't see a response, just give us a few minutes to process them. Sometimes there are quite a few questions and we're trying to get through as many as we can. But if we can't get to yours in time, don't worry, we're going to send you an email with your answer as soon as we have it. And as well, those common questions, as I mentioned, are going to go up on the GTAP forum, and as well as links to the video of today's webinar. And of course, you can see previous Genetec Tech Talk webinars on our YouTube channel and on the technical assistance portal of the side of the Genetec portal. So if you need to go back and take a look at anything, you can do so from there. So once again, I'd like to thank you very much for coming. On behalf of myself, Martina, the training department, the support department, and all of Genetec, thank you very much, and we hope you all have a great day. Thank you.